I have swept the same 40 yards of stone for 31 years. Same broom? Well, not the same broom. 11 brooms if you want the truth, but the same 40 yards. Willowgate Court, the old forecourt on the east side of Buckingham Palace, where the tour buses drop people off and the pigeons have gotten so bold they'll sit on your shoe. I know that stone better than I know my own kitchen floor. I know which flag rocks when you step on it. I know the crack near the drain that swallows earrings, coins, dropped rings, once a child's tooth in a plastic bag. I know where the frost comes first in November and where the sun hits last in July. And I'm telling you all that so you understand what I mean when I say this. On the 14th of October, at 9 minutes past 11 in the morning, I watched a queen do something in that courtyard that made 400 people forget how to breathe. And I watched a royal guard, a man who had not moved in 3 hours, not blinked wrong, not shifted his weight. I watched that man's face come apart like wet paper. He didn't fall, he didn't step off his post. He just stood there and let it happen to him in front of everybody. I've had a long time to think about what I saw, and I still can't tell it without my throat going tight. So let me start where it actually starts, because if I jump to the end, you won't understand why it mattered. Ashwine, if you don't know it, is a small kingdom and a proud one. We're the sort of place that has more history than land. Our palace isn't the biggest in Europe. Our army wouldn't frighten anybody. But we have a courtyard with 140 years of ceremony ground into the stone, and we have the Willowgate Guard, and we had Queen Isolde. She died in the summer, the end of July. It was hot that week, unnaturally hot, and I remember because the flowers people left along the railings cooked in the sun and turned brown in a day, and I had to clear them, and it felt like the worst job I've ever done. 31 years of sweeping, and that was the week that broke me, carrying dead flowers away from a fence while people watched me do it. She'd been queen for 41 years. Which means for most of Ashwine she wasn't a queen at all. She was just the weather, the thing that was always there. You didn't think about it. Then it stops and you find out you had no idea how much of your life was arranged around it. They unveiled the statue 11 weeks later, beginning of October. Bronze, 9 feet on a gray granite base, right in the middle of Willowgate Court where the old fountain used to be before the pipes gave out in '98. They put her standing, not sitting. Coat, plain shoes, chin slightly up, the way she used to stand when she was listening to somebody and deciding whether to believe them. The sculptor got her right. I'll give him that. Most statues make people look like they're about to give a speech. This one made her look like she was about to ask you a question. But there was a thing about that statue that nobody could stop talking about. Her left hand. Her right hand is down at her side, closed, natural, but her left hand is out, just slightly. Away from her body, palm turned up, fingers open. Empty. And it drove people mad. The papers had a fortnight of it. Was she meant to be holding something? Was it a mistake? Was it unfinished? Did the foundry lose a piece? There was a columnist who wrote that it made her look like she was begging, and I wanted to find that man and put my broom through his window. There was another one who said it was a profound statement on absence. Whatever that means. The sculptor gave one interview and said 7 words about it. I remember them because they were in every paper the next morning. He said the hand isn't empty, it's waiting. And then he wouldn't say anything else. Not one thing, went back to his workshop in the north and stopped answering the telephone. So the hand stayed empty, and people came from everywhere to stand in front of it and take pictures and argue about it, and I swept up their coffee cups. Now the guard. You need to understand the post first because most people don't. They see the uniform and the stillness and they think it's decoration. A photo opportunity, something for tourists to stand next to and pull faces at. It isn't. The Willowgate Guard is a real posting with a real duty, and the men on it are soldiers who have done real things in real places. The stillness isn't a trick. It's discipline. You stand a 2-hour shift and you do not move except on command, and during those 2 hours you are, in every way that matters, the property of the crown. They set up a permanent post at the statue the day after the unveiling. 1 man at the base off to the right side. 6-hour rotation, 3 men, 2 hours each, dawn until dusk. The man on the morning shift that week was Guardsman Elias Fenn. I knew Fenn, not well, you don't get to know them well, they don't chat, but I knew him the way you know somebody you've shared a courtyard with. He was maybe 26, 27, tall but not showy about it. Dark hair. One of those faces that looks stern at rest and completely different when it isn't. I'd seen him laugh exactly once. 2 winters back before the Queen died, before any of this. A woman's hat blew off in the wind and went across the whole courtyard like a bird with a broken wing and landed on the head of a man who was bending down to tie his shoe. And I saw Fenn's mouth go, just for a half-second, and then lock back down. He caught me watching. He didn't look at me again for a month. That was Fenn, serious, careful, the kind of young man who'd been raised by somebody who had rules. And I'll tell you something else about him that I noticed and never mentioned to anybody, because it wasn't my business. After the Queen died, he changed. Not in any way an inspector could write up. He was perfect. He was more perfect, if anything, but he'd started arriving early. 20 minutes, half an hour early, on his own time, in his own clothes sometimes. He'd stand off by the east arch with a paper cup of tea and look at the courtyard. Not at anything, just at it. I'd sweep past and nod, and he'd nod back, and neither of us would say a word. Grief is a private country. Everybody thinks they're the only one who's ever been there. The 14th of October was a Tuesday. It had rained hard overnight, proper autumn rain, the kind that comes sideways and gets into everything. And it had stopped around 6 in the morning, which meant the whole courtyard was that wet gray color that stone goes when it's soaked, and the sun hasn't decided about it yet. The air smelled like wet leaves and diesel. There's a road behind the east wall, and you always get a bit of the buses. I came on at 6:30. That's my start. First thing I do is walk the drains, because after a rain like that the leaves pack in and by afternoon you've got a puddle 6 inches deep and some poor woman stepping in it in her good shoes. Fenn was already there. Not on post, his shift was 8 to 10. Just standing under the east arch out of the wet in his greatcoat with the collar up, holding a cup. "Morning," I said. "Morning, Mr. Wren." He always called me that, Mr. Wren. I told him once to call me Aldous, and he said yes, sir, and then went on calling me Mr. Wren for 2 years. I got about 6 feet past him, and then, I don't know why, I stopped. "You all right, son?" He didn't answer straight away. And that's the thing that stayed with me, because a man who's fine says fine immediately. It's automatic. It comes out before you've thought about it. Fenn thought about it. Then he said, "Long night." And he smiled, sort of, with the bottom half of his face. I said something useless. Well, it stopped raining anyway, and I went and did my drains. That was the whole conversation. 9 words from him. I've turned those 9 words over about 4,000 times since. He went on post at 8. I want to describe this properly, because everything that came later only makes sense if you understand how still he was. The post is on the granite base, right side, 1 step up. He stands with the statue behind his right shoulder, rifle at his side, eyes forward. The crowd's in front of him, behind a low rope about 8 feet back. By 9, the tour buses had started, and the courtyard had that morning noise, suitcases on stone, a guide with one of those little speakers, children who have been told 6 times to stop running and are still running. By 10, there were maybe 200 people. By 11, and I'll come back to why, there were 400, easy. Maybe more. The court was full front to back, and they were standing on the low wall by the east arch, and I was going to have to say something about that and never got the chance. And through all of it, Fenn didn't move. That's normal, that's the job. But I'd watched that job for 31 years, and I'm telling you there was something different that morning, and I couldn't have told you what it was if you'd paid me. He was too still. Does that make sense? There's a stillness that's a man doing his duty, and there's a stillness that's a man holding onto something with both hands. There was a family down the front, tourists, and their little boy, 6, 7, had got right up to the rope and was doing the thing they all do, waving, pulling faces, standing on one leg, trying to get a reaction. They never get one. But usually you can feel the guard not reacting if you know what to look for. There's a little bit of a person in there deciding, every second, not to laugh. I couldn't feel anything in Fenn. It was like looking at the statue. At 10 o'clock, his relief came out for the changeover. And Fenn didn't go. Now that meant nothing to the crowd. They don't know the timings, but I nearly dropped my broom. I've watched that changeover roughly 11,000 times. It is the most reliable thing in my life. It happens at the hour. It has happened at the hour through storms, through a bomb scare in '09, through the death of a monarch. The other lad came out, and there was about 4 seconds of something, and then he turned round and went back in. Fenn stayed on post. 10 past 10, half past, 11 o'clock came and went, 3 hours and counting on a 2-hour post. I stopped sweeping. I stood by the west drain with my hands on the broom handle like an old fool, and I watched him, and I thought, something is happening today. And I looked around at 400 people taking photographs of a bronze woman, and I realized something else. They didn't know why they were there. That's the honest truth. The crowd had doubled that morning, and there was no reason for it. No announcement, no anniversary, nothing in the papers. Word had just gone round. The way it does. Somebody sees a car, somebody rings somebody puts it on the internet, and by 11 o'clock 400 people are standing in a wet courtyard in Ashwine with no idea what they're waiting for. Crowds know things before people do. I've believed that for 31 years, and I'll die believing it. At 6 minutes past 11, 3 cars came through the north gate. No outriders, no motorcycle escort. No advance man with an earpiece walking the route the way they do. 3 black cars, going slowly, with the tires hissing on the wet. And here's the thing that made the courtyard go quiet before anything even happened. There was no press. Not one photographer, not one van, not one man with a stepladder. When a royal comes to a public place, the press know a week ahead. They're there 2 hours early, fighting over the good spot, drinking coffee, complaining. It is as certain as the tide. That morning there was nobody, which meant nobody had told them, which meant this wasn't on any schedule anywhere. Which meant she decided to come. The cars stopped by the East Arch and the noise in the courtyard changed. It didn't stop. It just dropped. 400 people going quiet isn't silence. It's a sort of hum, a shuffling, 100 phones coming up at once. A man got out of the first car. Gray suit. Not a bodyguard, you can tell. Bodyguards look at people. This man looked at the ground. He looked absolutely wretched. He looked like a man who'd spent the whole drive arguing and lost. Then the door of the second car opened. And Queen Verity got out. I need to explain about Verity, because if you're not from Ashwine, you won't understand the temperature in that courtyard when her shoe touched the stone. She'd been queen for 11 weeks. Isolde's son had died in 2011. That's a whole other story, and I won't tell it here, and the crown had gone sideways the way it does to Isolde's niece. Verity, 44 years old. Married, no children. Lived up north, kept horses, ran some charitable thing for veterans that nobody paid much attention to. Nobody knew her. That was the problem. 41 years of Isolde, and then a woman we'd seen perhaps a dozen times in our lives. And the country had not been kind. They said she was cold. They said she'd not cried at the funeral. I watched that funeral, and she didn't, and I understood exactly why, and half the country didn't. They said she was avoiding the palace. She'd canceled 2 engagements in September. There was a rumor she wouldn't take the coronation. There was a nastier rumor that she'd refused to attend the statue unveiling, which wasn't even true. She'd been ill, properly ill, and they'd hushed it up, and the papers had a fortnight of fun with her empty chair. 11 weeks, and they'd already decided about her. That's what people do. They decide and then they collect. So when she got out of that car, in a black coat, on a wet Tuesday, with no press and no warning, 400 people looked at her the way you look at somebody who's about to do something you can already disapprove of. And she was wearing the crown. I want to be careful here, because this part gets told wrong. It wasn't the big one. It wasn't the state crown with the arches, the one that goes on at a coronation, the one that's in the glass case with the guards on it. That thing weighs 4 pounds and you don't wear it to a courtyard. It was the small one, the circlet. The old one, the thin gold band with the willow leaves worked into it, which is the actual crown of Ashwine, the one that's 400 years old, the one that was a crown before we could afford anything better. But here's what mattered. Nobody had seen it on a head in 41 years. Because Isolde never wore it. She was crowned with it 1984 in the cathedral one afternoon, and then she took it off and it went in the case and it stayed there for 4 decades. She wore hats. She wore that blue one everybody remembers. She never wore the crown once in public in her entire reign, and when she was asked why, in an interview in the 90s, She said something that people in Ashwine can still recite. She said, "It isn't a hat, it's a debt." And she smiled and moved on to the next question, and that was that. 41 years, never again. And now here was Verity, 11 weeks in, not crowned, not confirmed. No coronation date even set, walking across Willowgate Court in the rain wet with the crown of Ashwin on her head. You could hear it, honestly. You could hear 400 people take a breath at the same time, and it sounded like wind in a hedge. The man in the gray suit was 2 steps behind her, and I could see his mouth moving. Low, fast, still arguing. She didn't turn round, she didn't stop. She just walked. She came across the court diagonally, from the east arch toward the statue, and she wasn't hurrying and she wasn't performing. She walked like somebody crossing their own kitchen. Her heels were going on the stone, and it was the only sound in the whole place. Tug, tug, tug. I was maybe 30 feet away. West side. Broom in my hands like an idiot, and I remember thinking, absurdly, the flags are wet, mind the one by the drain, it rocks. She missed it, went right past it. The crowd parted. They didn't need telling. 400 people opened up a lane through the middle of themselves without a single word being spoken, and she went down it, and it closed behind her. And she stopped about 10 feet from the base of the statue. And she looked up at her aunt. For a long time. I don't know how long, longer than was comfortable, long enough that people started shifting, long enough that somebody's child said something and got hushed so fast it was practically a slap. She just stood there in the wet and looked up at a bronze woman. And Guardsman Elias Fenn stood on the base, 1 step up 8 feet from her, eyes forward, absolutely rigid. He didn't look at her. Of course he didn't. He's not allowed to look at her. But I was standing at an angle to him, 30 feet away off to his left, and I had the side of his face. And I want to tell you what I saw, and I want you to believe me, because there were 400 people in that courtyard, and I think I might have been the only one at the right angle. His jaw was going. Not shaking, working. That thing men do when they're holding something down, the muscle at the hinge of the jaw, tightening and releasing, tightening and releasing. His eyes were forward and open and fixed, and I could see the whole side of his face, and there was a wet line down it. Already, before anything had happened. He was crying, standing at attention with a rifle at his side in front of 400 people, at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was already crying, and not one person in that crowd could see it because they were all looking at her. I thought, he knows what she's going to do. That's what went through my head, standing there with a broom in my hands. Not what's wrong with him, not someone help him. I thought, that man knows what's coming. Then the Queen moved. She took 2 steps forward. Closer, close enough now that she could have touched the granite. The man in the gray suit made a noise. A little one, half a word. And he took 1 step after her and then stopped himself and stood there with his hand half up, looking like a man watching a car roll toward a cliff with the handbrake off. And Queen Verity reached up, both hands slowly to her own head. And 400 people in Willowgate Court understood in the same half-second what she was about to do, and I heard it. I actually heard the sound they made, and it wasn't a gasp, it was lower than that. It was a kind of groan. Because in Ashwin there is one rule about that crown. One, it's not law, it's older than law. It's the sort of thing your grandmother tells you and you laugh about, and then you never, ever do it. The crown of Ashwin does not touch the ground. Not stone, not earth, not floor. It goes from the case to the head to the case. A crown that touches the ground is a crown that's been put down, and a crown that's been put down means the line is broken and the house is finished, and they've believed that here for 400 years, and they believed it that morning too, every last one of them, whatever they'd tell you now. She lifted it off her head. Somebody screamed, an actual scream. A woman behind me and to the right, and it went across that courtyard like a crack in glass. And Elias Fenn, who had not moved in 3 hours and 11 minutes, who was crying with his eyes open and his chin level and his rifle at his side. Elias Fenn turned his head. He turned his head. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I don't think I'm going to be able to make you feel it the way I felt it. A guardsman on the Willowgate post does not turn his head. It is not a rule you're told once. It's the whole thing. It's the entire architecture of the job. A man stands there and he becomes a fixed point, and the crowd moves, and the weather moves, and the world moves, and he does not, and that's the point of him. There have been 11 documented breaks of the Willowgate post in 140 years. 11. I know that number because there's a plaque about it inside the guardroom that nobody's meant to see, and I've seen it because I'm the man who cleans the guardroom. 9 of those 11 were medical. A man goes over, that's not a break, that's a body giving out. 2 were men who moved on purpose. One was in 1971, and he was dismissed inside the hour, and I've heard his name maybe twice in 31 years, said quietly, the way you'd say a swear word in church. The other one happened at 11 minutes past 11 on the 14th of October, and I watched it from 30 feet away with a broom in my hands. Elias Fenn turned his head, and he looked at his queen. And she wasn't looking at him. She had the crown in both hands, down at about her chest, holding it the way you'd hold a bowl of soup you were worried about spilling. Careful, 2 hands, and she was looking up at the statue. The scream had died. That woman behind me, I never found out who she was, had put her hand over her own mouth. I could hear it, that muffled sound people make when they've frightened themselves. 400 people were waiting for the crown of Ashwin to touch the ground. I'm not going to pretend I'm better than them. I was waiting for it too. I had my eyes on her hands, and I was thinking, in a very flat, very calm way, she's going to put it on the stone, and that's the end of the house of Ashwin, and I'm standing here holding a broom. That's what 400 years of a story does to you. You can be an educated man, you can know it's superstition, it doesn't matter. The story's in you like water's in a sponge. She didn't put it on the stone. She turned just slightly toward the statue, and she lifted it. Up, both hands. Above her head, and she's not a tall woman, and the base is a step up. And she had to go right up onto the balls of her feet, and I saw her wobble, actually wobble, on wet granite in October, with the crown of Ashwin over her head and 400 people watching, and nobody in that entire courtyard breathed. And she reached across, and she put the crown into the statue's open left hand. There's a sound bronze makes. Not a clang, not a ring. It's duller than that, a sort of soft, heavy talk, wood-like almost, and it went across that courtyard in the dead quiet, and I heard it from 30 feet. Tug. And it sat there. It sat there in the palm of that open bronze hand, the hand everybody had been arguing about for a fortnight, the hand the columnists said made her look like she was begging. And it fit. I need to say this properly, because it's the part nobody believes. It didn't rest there. It didn't balance. It seated. The band went down into the curve of those bronze fingers, and it stopped, and it did not shift, not a millimeter, and the fingers came up around the outside of it exactly the way your hand comes around a cup you've held 10,000 times. That hand was made for that crown. Not made to hold a crown. Made to hold that crown. Somebody had measured. Somebody had sat in a workshop in the north with the actual dimensions of a 400-year-old gold band and built a bronze hand around them to a tolerance you could not do by eye, and then said 7 words to a journalist and stopped answering his telephone. The hand isn't empty, it's waiting. Waiting. I felt the whole courtyard understand it at once. 400 people arriving at the same thought inside the same second, and it makes a noise. That it's not a gasp, it's a kind of collapse. 100 people going oh under their breath, and 100 more not managing anything at all. Somebody started clapping and stopped after 2 claps. It was the wrong thing, and he knew it before anybody told him. Queen Verity came back down off her toes. She stood there a moment with her hands empty and her head bare in the wet air. Her hair was doing what hair does in October, and she didn't touch it. She had a mark across her forehead where the band had sat. I could see it from 30 feet. A pale line pressed into her skin. She was looking up at that bronze face. And then she said something. Out loud, not a speech. She hadn't come to make a speech. She'd come without press and without warning and without a single person's permission. She just said it in a normal voice, the way you'd say something to somebody in the next room, and the courtyard was so quiet that 400 people heard it. She said, "There, now hold it a while longer." That's all. Now hold it a while longer. And her voice broke on the last word. Not much, just enough. Just that little catch at the back where a word comes out the wrong shape and you can hear the whole of a person in it. The woman who never cried at the funeral. The cold one, the one who'd already been decided about. Then she turned round. And she saw Fen. I've thought about this more than any other part, because from where I was standing, I could see both their faces at once, and I don't think anybody else in Willowgate Court could. Fen had his head turned. He was in flagrant, dismissible, career-ending violation of the post. His chin had come round maybe 40 degrees, and his eyes were on her and his face. God! His face was gone, completely gone. Both sides wet now, not a line but properly running, down past his jaw and into his collar, and his mouth was doing that thing, that awful thing, where the corners pull down and the chin puckers and a grown man is trying to hold his own face together with muscles that have stopped taking orders. And he was still at attention. That's what I can't get past. Boots together, rifle at his side, spine like a plumb line, absolutely rigid from the neck down and absolutely destroyed from the neck up. A man doesn't look like that because he's moved. He looks like that because he's understood something. And Queen Verity stopped. She'd been turning to walk away. She stopped mid-turn on wet stone and she looked at him. And here's what she didn't do. She didn't look away to spare him. That's what you do. That's what a kind stranger does. You see a man crying, you find something else to look at, you give him his privacy back. She didn't do that. She stood in front of him, and she looked directly at him for what I'd swear was 6 or 7 full seconds, and she let him be seen. There's a difference between those two things, and I didn't understand it until I was 58 years old and standing in a wet courtyard. Then she gave him a nod. Small, not the royal thing, not the one you see on balconies. A short, downward nod, the kind a man gives another man across a room when something's been settled between them. And Fen's chin came back round to the front. Slowly, like it cost him something to do it. And his eyes went forward and his face locked, and the tears kept coming down it, and he didn't wipe them, and he didn't blink them away, and he stood there. The Queen walked back across Willowgate Court. She went through the lane the crowd had made, and nobody photographed her. I want that in the record. 400 people with phones in their hands, and I watched 100 of them put those phones down as she came past. Just down. Not out of respect for a rule. Nobody had told them anything. They just couldn't do it. The man in the gray suit was standing exactly where he'd stopped, with his hand still half raised, and she went past him and he had to run 3 steps to catch up. The cars went out the north gate at 18 minutes past 11. And 400 people were left standing in a courtyard with a bareheaded statue holding a crown. I'll tell you what happened next, and it's the part that gets left out. Nothing happened next. Nobody moved for about a minute and a half. Nobody talked. It was the strangest thing I've ever been in the middle of a courtyard full of people and no noise, and the buses still going past behind the east wall, and a pigeon. I remember a pigeon walking across the empty stone in front of the statue like it owned the place. Then a man near the front started crying. A big man, 60s, in a waterproof coat, absolutely bawling, and his wife had hold of his arm, and she was looking at him like she'd never seen him before in her life. And that broke it, because that's how it goes. One person, and then it's everybody. I saw a girl of about 19 sit straight down on the wet stone with her hands over her face. I saw a tour guide with her little speaker turned off, just standing, mouth open. I saw a Dutch family. I know they were Dutch. They came every year. I'd swept up after them since the children were small. I saw the mother turn her son round by the shoulders so he was facing the statue and hold him there, and say something to him in Dutch, and he was maybe 14 and he stood still for it. And I saw people go up to the rope. Slowly, one at a time, and they'd stop about 6 feet from Guardsman Elias Fen and just look at him, and go away again. Not photographing him, not pulling faces. Just looking, like you'd look at somebody at a graveside. He stood until dusk. That's the bit that got in all the papers afterwards, and even then they got it slightly wrong. They said 8 hours. It was 8 hours and 40 minutes. 2-hour post. He did 8 hours and 40 minutes, from 8 in the morning until 20 to 5 in the afternoon, and the only reason he came off then was that the light went, and the post ends at last light, and that is a fixed thing. Nobody relieved him. I want to be careful about that because there was a stink about it later, questions in the house, an inquiry, some very unpleasant things said about the men in that guardroom, and it's rubbish. I was there, I saw what happened. His relief came out 3 times, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Came out under the east arch and stood, and looked, and understood, and went back in. You want to know what that is? That's not a failure of discipline. That's the deepest bit of discipline there is. That's a man recognizing that something is being carried and that it isn't his to take. The senior man that day, I won't name him, he's got grandchildren, was a warrant officer with 31 years in, same as my 31 years. We came in the same year, and I have known him since we were both 27 years old. He came out about 12:30 and stood next to me at the west drain. We watched Fen for a while. Then he said I should stop him. I said yes. And we stood there for another 20 minutes, and neither of us said anything else, and then he went back inside. That's the whole of it. That's the entire conspiracy the inquiry spent 4 months looking for. The news got out by 12:30. I mean the world's news. It went up on somebody's phone, obviously, from some angle at the back, and by lunchtime there were vans in the road behind the east wall and men on stepladders, and by 2 o'clock the courtyard had 1,100 people in it, and the police had to open the north lane, and I gave up entirely on sweeping. By evening it was everywhere. And I want to tell you about the first hours of that, because there's a lesson in it that I've never got over. They got it wrong. Every single one of them. For about 6 hours, the story of what happened in Willowgate Court was this. New Queen RMOVS Crown AT statue, Palace in crisis. That was the first headline. I saw it on a screen in the guardroom at 1:10. They ran it as a breakdown, as an abdication. One channel had a man on within the hour explaining, very confidently, that Verity had symbolically rejected the throne and that we were looking at a constitutional emergency. Somebody else said she'd had a public collapse. Somebody used the word unstable on live television at 2 in the afternoon. And the phrase that got used over and over and made me want to put my fist through the wall. Shocking act. The new Queen's shocking act toward the late Queen's statue. Because they had the footage, wobbly from the back over 100 heads, you could see her take the crown off, you could see her reach up. You could not, from that angle, see what she'd put it into. For 6 hours, the entire world watched a queen take off a crown, and not one of them could see the hand. That's the thing about a story. Everybody starts watching at a different second, and whatever second you start at, you're absolutely certain that's the beginning. It turned at about 7 that evening when the good footage came out, somebody near the front, a proper angle, and you could see the crown go into the bronze fingers, and you could see it seat. And by 9 o'clock, the same channels were running it as the most extraordinary act of grace anybody had seen in a generation, with no acknowledgement whatsoever of what they'd been saying at 2. 6 hours. That's how long the truth took to walk from Willowgate Court to the rest of the world. And in those 6 hours, a woman who'd buried her aunt 11 weeks before was called unstable on television. I've never watched the news the same way since. Not once, not one single time. Now, I'm going to tell you the part I've never told anybody. The court cleared out about 9:30 at night. Police did it gently, and the last few went, and it was just me and the mess. And it was a mess. 1,100 people leave a lot behind. Cups, wrappers, 2 umbrellas, a child's glove, flowers, hundreds of them by then, banked up against the rope. People had gone out and bought flowers and come back. And they'd left the crown in the hand. There was a decision made somewhere that evening, at some level I'll never know about, that it stayed. 2 men on it overnight instead of 1, but it stayed. I was working my way down the west side with the barrow at about 10 o'clock when I saw somebody sitting on the low wall by the east arch. Civilian clothes, dark coat, head down. I knew who it was before I got close. He'd showered and changed, and he was sitting on a wet wall in the dark on his own time, 40 feet from the statue, with his elbows on his knees. I nearly walked past. God's honest truth. I got within about 10 feet and I thought, leave the man alone, Aldous, he's had a day. But I've thought since, if I'd walked past, I'd have gone to my grave not knowing. So I stopped. I said, you want to be careful. That wall's wet. And he laughed. Not a real one, but something. He said, I don't think that's my biggest problem, Mr. Wren. I put the barrow down, I sat next to him, 2 feet of space between us the way men do. We didn't say anything for a bit. There was a light on the statue by then, one of the temporary ones, and you could see the crown from where we were sitting. Gold on bronze in the dark. It looked, I don't know, it looked like it had been there 400 years. Then I said the thing I'd been carrying around since 11 minutes past 11 that morning. I said, "You turned your head." He didn't answer. I said, "Son, I've watched that post for 31 years. I've seen men stand through hail. I saw a lad get stung by a wasp on the eyelid and not move. I've never seen a man turn his head." Still nothing. And then I said, and I don't know where it came from, it just came out of me. "You knew before she did it. You were crying before she even touched it. You knew what she was going to do." And Elias Fenn sat forward on that wall with his hands hanging between his knees and looked at the stone between his boots. And he said, "I've known for 11 weeks. I said, "What?" He said, "I've known for 11 weeks and I couldn't tell one living soul, and today I stood there and watched it happen, and I thought it was going to kill me." His voice had gone, completely. That flat, scraped, hollowed-out sound a man's voice goes when it's been through something. I said, 11 weeks. He said, "Since the 29th of July. And I felt the cold come up my back, because the 29th of July was the night Queen Isolde died. I said, "Elias, what happened on the 29th of July? And he turned and looked at me. And he said, "I was on the corridor post outside her room. I was the last person she spoke to. I was the last person she spoke to." We sat on that wall for a long time after he said it. I didn't ask him anything. I want you to know that. Whatever you think of me, I didn't push. I sat there on wet stone in the dark, next to a man who'd stood for 8 hours and 40 minutes, and I kept my mouth shut, and I let him decide. Eventually, he decided. "The 29th of July, he said. "I had the corridor post, 3rd floor, west side. 10 at night till 4 in the morning. I knew the post. I've cleaned that corridor. It's nothing much, a long runner of carpet, 6 doors, a window at the end that looks out over the kitchen roofs. It's the least glamorous posting in the palace, and they give it to the young ones. There were people in and out all night," he said. "Doctors, 2 nurses. The Archbishop came at midnight and left at 12:30, and I remember thinking that was quick." He laughed at that, a horrible little laugh. About 2 in the morning it went quiet. Everybody was in the room. Then about 10 past 3 the door opened and both nurses came out, both of them, down the corridor and round the corner. I found out after, one of them had gone to fetch something and the other went with her because she didn't want to walk it alone. That's all. That's the whole reason. 2 women didn't want to walk down a corridor on their own at 3 in the morning. He looked at the stone between his boots. And for about 90 seconds, there was nobody in that room but her. "And you," I said. "And me outside on post." "She called out," he said. I said, "Called out how?" "Not loud, she hadn't got loud left in her. She said a name, and I couldn't hear it properly through the door, and then she said it again." He stopped. "Mr. Wren, I want you to understand what the post is, because everybody thinks it's about standing still. It isn't. It's about not existing. You're not in that corridor. You're a fixture. Whatever happens behind that door is not yours. You don't hear it. You never heard it. If the Queen of Ashwan is dying 8 feet from you, you did not hear a thing because you were not there because you're a post." "I know," I said. "So I stood there." He said it very flat. I stood there and she said it a 3rd time and I stood there. I didn't say anything. "And then I went in," he said. "There it is. 11 documented breaks in 140 years, on a plaque nobody's meant to see. And the 12th happened at 10 past 3 in the morning on the 29th of July in a corridor with no witnesses, and it was never documented at all. I opened the door and I went in and I let it shut behind me," he said. "And that's it. That's the end of my career, right there. That's the whole thing. And I did it in about a second and a half without deciding anything." "What was in the room?" "Just her." He said it so simply that it took the wind out of me. Just her in a bed in the dark with one lamp on the far side. And I stood inside the door like an idiot because I'd gone in and now I didn't know what a man does next. "And she saw you." "She saw me. She thought I was Alexander," he said. "Alexander, her son. Dead in 2011, and I won't tell that story here, but there isn't a person in Ashwin over 30 who can hear that name without their face changing. For about 4 seconds, Fen said. She said his name and she put her hand up, and His voice stopped working. He had to sit there for a bit and get it back. I went over, he said. I took her hand, because what was I supposed to do, Mr. Wren? Stand by the door and correct her. She was 83 years old and she was dying and she thought her son had come. So I went over and I took her hand and I let her think it. Good, I said. It wasn't good, it was a lie. It was the only kind that's worth anything. He didn't answer that. And then she came back, he said. That's the bit I wasn't ready for. She came back. Her eyes changed, and she looked right at me and she knew exactly who I wasn't. What did she do? She said, oh. He said it just like that, small, deflating. Just oh, and I thought that's it, I've done it, they'll have me out by breakfast. And I started to let go of her hand. And she didn't let me. I've had 4 years to think about that sentence, and it still does something to my chest. She held on, he said. She had no strength at all, and she held on, and she looked at me, properly looked, the way she used to, that thing she did where you felt like she was reading the inside of your head, and she said, "What's your name?" And you told her. I said, "Guardsman Fen, ma'am." And she said, "Your name, son." He wiped his face with the flat of his hand, quickly, like he was annoyed with it. So I said, "Elias." And then she asked me for something, he said. Here it comes, I thought. Here's the thing that's been eating him for 11 weeks. She said, "Elias, will you fetch me the crown?" I sat very still on that wall. She said it like you'd ask somebody to pass the salt, he said. Just, will you fetch me the crown, like it was in the next room, like it was on a shelf. And it's in the case, I said. It's in the case. Ground floor, east wing, 400-year-old glass, 2 men on it, alarm on the cabinet, and the keys with the Lord Chamberlain who lives 40 minutes away. And I'd have needed a written order signed by 3 people and a reason. And she's got about 6 hours to live. She's got about 6 hours to live, and she's asking a 26-year-old guardsman to fetch her a crown from behind glass at 3 in the morning. What did you say? He took a long time. I said, "Ma'am, I can't." The buses had stopped by then. It was quiet enough that I could hear him breathing. And she said, "No, no, of course you can't." And she was so, Mr. Wren, she wasn't angry, that's the thing. She wasn't the least bit angry with me. She was kind about it. She was dying and she was being kind to me about the fact that I couldn't do the one thing she'd asked. Did she say why she wanted it? I asked her that. And she said, "I've never held it. I wore it once and I gave it back the same afternoon, and I've never held the thing in my life. I want to stop here and explain something, because if you're not from Ashwine, this next part won't land the way it should. Everybody in this country knows Isolde's line. It isn't a hat, it's a debt. It's on tea towels. It's on the side of a mug in my kitchen, God help me. And for 41 years, we all thought we knew what she meant. We thought it was humility. We thought it was that lovely, modest thing where a monarch says, "I am the servant of my people," and everybody claps and buys the mug. That's not what she meant. She told me about her sister, Fen said. And I said, "Margaret." Margaret. Now Margaret. Isolde's elder sister, 2 years older. The actual heir, not the spare, the heir, the one who was raised for it from the age of 4, the one who had the tutors and the languages and the whole weight of it laid on her before she could read. And in 1983, she went to Castellan on a state visit, and the aircraft went into the sea. Everybody knows that. What nobody talks about, because we don't, because it's rude, because it's been 40-something years, is that Isolde was crowned 9 months later, at 39 years old with about 6 weeks of preparation, in a job she had never once in her life expected to have. She said, and Fen had to stop and start again. She said, "It was never mine, Elias, I only ever kept it warm." 41 years. 41 years of the best reign this country has ever had, and the woman who did it thought, right down to the last hour of her life, that she was holding somebody else's coat. That's the debt, I said. My voice came out strange. That's the debt, he said. She owed it back, she'd always owed it back. And there was nobody to give it to. Alexander went in 2011, and after that there was only the one line left. Margaret's daughter. And I sat on that wall in the dark, 58 years old, and I finally understood what I'd watched at 11 minutes past 11 that morning. Verity. Not a substitute, not a stranger from up north who kept horses and got handed a crown by accident. Verity was the heir's daughter. The crown was going home. So she asked you for it, I said, because she wanted to hold it once before she handed it back. That's what I think. And you couldn't get it. I couldn't get it. He sat forward with his hands over his mouth for a bit. She died at 9:20 that morning, he said through his fingers. I was off post by then. I was in my bed, and she never held it. She asked one person in the world for one thing, and the person she asked was me, and I said no, and then she died. I'm not a clever man, I sweep a courtyard. But I've buried a wife and a brother, and I know one or two things about the shape of this, so I said the only true thing I had. I said, son, if you'd gone and got that crown, you'd have been arrested before you got to the stairs. And she knew that. She knew it when she asked you. Then why ask? Because at 3 in the morning, you were the only person in the room. He didn't say anything. She didn't ask a guardsman for a crown, I said. She asked a young man who just held her hand and let her think he was her son. That's who she asked, Elias. She wasn't putting in a request. She was talking to somebody. He cried then, properly, head down on a wet wall in the dark with nobody watching but me and a bronze woman with a crown in her hand. And I sat there and let him, because that's the entire job description of an old man. Now the sculptor. I got the rest of it later in bits, over about a year, the way you always get things in a place like this. Isolde commissioned that statue herself. Nobody knew, not the household, not the government, not the press. In the last February of her life, she wrote to a sculptor in the north, a man she'd never met, whose work she'd seen once in a chapel, and she asked him to make her. And she gave him exactly one instruction about the design. The left hand open, palm up, nothing in it. And she sent him the measurements of the crown. To the millimeter. She'd had someone take them quietly from the case on some pretext, and she posted them to a workshop 300 miles away with a note. That's why the hand fit. That's why it's seated. A woman who'd never held the thing in her life knew its dimensions to the millimeter because she'd carried them around in her head for 41 years. The sculptor was bound to silence. She'd asked him for that too, and he kept it. And he kept it through a fortnight of columnists calling his work unfinished, and one of them saying it made her look like she was begging. He gave them 7 words, the hand isn't empty, it's waiting. And then he stopped answering the telephone, because he'd promised a dying woman he would. And Verity found out on the 9th of October. The sculptor wrote to her, that's all. 5 days after the unveiling, after a fortnight of it in the papers, an old man in the north sat down and wrote a letter to a queen he'd never met and told her what her aunt had asked for. I've never seen that letter. I never will. But I know it existed, because on the 14th of October, a woman who had canceled 2 engagements and been called cold and unstable, and every other thing got into a car with no press and no warning and no permission, wearing the crown of Ashwin on her head for the first, and to this day, only time in her life. She'd worked out what the hand was for. And she came and she gave it back. There, now hold it a while longer. Not goodbye, not thank you. Hold it a while longer. Meaning, I'm not ready. Meaning, you kept it warm for 41 years and I'm not going to snatch it off you 11 weeks after they put you in the ground. Meaning, you thought it was a debt and it wasn't, it was never a debt, and I'm going to leave it in your hand where the whole country can see it. Which is why there is still no crown in the case in the East Wing. It's outside, in the rain, in a bronze hand, 4 years now. There was an inquiry, of course. 4 months of it, and it wasn't about the Queen. Nobody was mad enough to inquire into the Queen. It was about the post. Guardsman Elias Fenn, 8 hours and 40 minutes. Head turned 40 degrees at 11 minutes past 11 in front of 400 witnesses and about 900 cameras. That's a dismissal. That's not a debate. There's a plaque about it. They interviewed me twice. I told them what I've told you, minus the wall. They interviewed the warrant officer and he told them, and I quote, that he had made a decision and would make it again, which is the most words I have ever known that man to use at once. And in February, the thing landed on a desk, and the recommendation was dismissal, and it went up for signature. And it came back with one line written on it. Not a pardon, not an order. She didn't have the power to do that, and she didn't try. She wrote he was not the only one who moved that day. That's all, 7 words and her initial. They didn't dismiss him. Fenn left the guard anyway. 2 years later, on his own terms, at the end of a contract, with the whole of his record clean. He teaches now, history of all things, at a school about 90 minutes from here. I get a card at Christmas. He signs at Elia's and he still writes Mr. Wren on the envelope, and I've given up. He's never spoken publicly. Not once. 4 years and the offers he's had, I know what he's been offered. He told me the number once and I had to sit down, and he's never said a word. Because a guardsman doesn't repeat what he hears on post. He broke that once in the dark on a wall to a man with a barrow. And I've kept it for 4 years, and I'm telling you now, and the only reason I'm telling you now is that he rang me last month and said, "Mr. Wren, if you want to tell it, tell it." I asked him why. He said, because they've started saying she did it for the cameras. There weren't any cameras. That's the whole point. That's the entire point of the whole thing. There were no cameras. She came without them. She came on a wet Tuesday with a man in a gray suit begging her not to, and she gave a crown back to a dead woman who'd spent 41 years thinking she'd stolen it. And for 6 hours the world watched it and called it a shocking act. I'm 62 now, I still sweep. Same 40 yards, 12th broom. The crowds haven't stopped. 4 years and they still come, all day, every day, and they stand in front of that statue and look up at the crown in the bronze hand and take their photographs. And I sweep up their coffee cups. Some of them ask me, now and then. An old man with a broom in a famous courtyard. Somebody always asks, eventually, were you here? And I say yes. And they say, what was it like? And I've never once managed to answer it properly. Because the truth is the biggest thing I've ever seen happened in about 7 seconds in front of 400 people who didn't know why they'd come, and there's no way to hand that to a stranger with a rucksack on. So mostly I just say, it was quiet. Which is true and useless. But there's one thing I do. Every morning 6:30 before the buses, when the court's empty and the lights still gray, I walk the drains. 31 years, 32 now, same as I've always done. And the last drains at the base of the statue. And I have never once, in 4 years, swept under that hand without looking up. She's still holding it. She said it wasn't a hat, she said it was a debt. She was wrong about that. And it took her whole country 41 years and one wet Tuesday in October to tell her so. And the only man who knew it was standing 8 feet away with a rifle at his side, crying his eyes out, and not one of us could see it.